Good morning. Welcome to Dale Street Evangelical Church Online. Welcome to our 6th session in our Why Church series, kind of exploring the reasons why church is important to us, why it's important in our Christian lives, and why should we come to church, you know. Now originally we hoped this would be our final session before returning to church, but I'm sure I don't really need to tell you that we're going to have another 4 weeks to wait until we can return. But it's only 4 weeks and it'll be here before you know it, and we'll be back to church, and well I was going to say life will be closer to being back to normal, but honestly after 15 months I'm not even sure what normal is anymore. You know, it's probably going to feel strange at first when we don't have to wear masks going to the supermarket or scan QR codes every time you want to enter a building. So anyway, as I say, we're on week 6 of our series Why Church, and today we'll be looking at encouragement. And in some ways this could almost be a continuation of the subject I had 3 weeks ago, which was on fellowship, because the two are kind of closely linked. Because while of course it's possible for anyone to encourage anyone else, you know, we're a lot less likely to give or receive encouragement with strangers or people we don't know well. You know, the better you know someone, the closer you are, the more likely you are to recognise when encouragement is needed, and more likely to actually go out of your way to give the encouragement. So one of the great benefits of fellowship is the opportunity to encourage. Now the verses we're going to be looking at this morning are found in the book of Hebrews in chapter 10, and it's verses 24 and 25. And it says, "Let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. And let us not neglect our meeting together, as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near." Now at the time of the writing of Hebrews, there was a great persecution going on. And it would have been very easy for believers to abandon the church, you know, to lose confidence in their faith and their beliefs, you know, and to go walk away because they faced persecution. Now, can you imagine if that had happened, and that had happened in great numbers? That could have seriously jeopardised the spread of the early church. But these verses exhort us to encourage one another. Encouragement is an act that helps someone to be a better believer, even when life is rough and tough. Now, to try and fully grasp the power of encouragement, we're going to look at it from 2 different perspectives this morning. Firstly, we'll look at an example of someone who was a great encourager in the Bible, and we kind of see what a person of encouragement looks like. And then when we've seen what it looks like to be that person, we'll take a look at what it actually means to encourage one another. How do we encourage one another? You know, what are the benefits of encouraging one another? So firstly, the person of encouragement. Now in the Bible, we see a great example of a man who lived a life of encouragement. Now his name, depending on which version you read, Jose's or Joseph, and at this point you're probably thinking, Jose's or Joseph? Which Joseph? There's a few Josephs. But actually he's much better known for his nickname than his real name. And in this case, he was better known as Barnabas. And hopefully that now you know who I'm talking about. Now we first encounter Barnabas in Acts chapter 4, verses 34 to 37, where it says, "There were no needy people among them, because those who owned land or houses would sell them and bring the money to the apostles to give to those in need. For instance, there was Joseph, the one the apostles nicknamed Barnabas, which means son of encouragement. He was from the tribe of Levi and came from the island of Cyprus. He sold a field he owned and brought the money to the apostles." Now, friends and family and kind of colleagues maybe, they give us nicknames for various reasons. Sometimes it's to shorten our names. I know at school I was often called Butty, because it's shorter than Butterfield. Sometimes we give people nicknames kind of to tease them a bit, you know. Sometimes people get nicknames to point out a quality in that person, and that was absolutely the case with Joseph or Barnabas, that he earned that nickname for his unselfish, sacrificial life and testimony. Barnabas sold his land to support God's work and people, and it was the apostles themselves who dubbed him son of encouragement. Now, I don't know what nicknames you've been given over your life, or if you were to think about what quality people might pick up on to give you a nickname, but would it be something as amazing as son of encouragement? I think another nickname I had at school was Smiler, because I was smiling a lot. It's quite a nice one, but it still doesn't, kind of feel as amazing as son of encouragement. Now in Acts 11:24 we read that Barnabas was a good man, full of the Holy Spirit and strong in faith, and many people were brought to the Lord. His goodness and faith brought encouragement to the brethren, proof that the Spirit was working in and through him. We see a counterexample to that of Barnabas. There's a bad example that we get also in Acts of Ananias and Sapphira. The kind of story is told in Acts chapter 5, the first 11 verses. And they sell some land and they also give money to the church. But instead of giving all the money or just giving some of the money and saying, here's some of the money, they pretend that the amount they're giving is the full amount they were paid for it, and they keep some to themselves. And there's giving, the fact that they wanted to give is a good thing. But the selfish way they went about it is such a contrast to the way Barnabas gave. And it has quite serious consequences for them in the story. So you can see here how we can see that kind of Barnabas was full of the Holy Spirit. Barnabas was controlled by the Spirit, whereas Ananias was controlled by Satan, and the kind of contrasting effect that has on their lives. Now Barnabas risked his name, his reputation and his honour on behalf of Saul, who later became Paul the Apostle. Now Paul had just become a new believer, but as I'm sure many of you know, prior to that he'd persecuted Christians. Yet Barnabas still supported Paul when no one else would. No one else would even want to meet with him, let alone believe the things he was saying. You have to wonder what would have happened to Paul if Barnabas hadn't stepped in and kind of sponsored him in this way and kind of supported him. Barnabas gave Paul his first ministry break in Acts chapter 11 when God opened the door in Antioch. The early church sent Barnabas, and we can read about it in Acts 11 verses 22-24. When the church at Jerusalem heard what had happened, they sent Barnabas to Antioch. When he arrived and saw the evidence of God's blessing, he was filled with joy, and he encouraged the believers to stay true to the Lord. Barnabas was a good man, full of the Holy Spirit and strong in faith, and many people were brought to the Lord. Note in the verse that here, encouraging means asking people to stay true to the Lord. And Barnabas could have taken on the work in Antioch for himself, but he took time, money and effort searching out for Paul. And it goes on in verse 25, then Barnabas went on to Tarsus to look for Saul. When he found him, he brought him back to Antioch. Both of them stayed there with the church for a full year, teaching large crowds of people. It was at Antioch that the believers were first called Christians. So that time he spent looking for Saul, paid off. Barnabas and won many people to the Lord. But with Paul on his team, it actually says how much they taught many people. Their ministry was so effective that the disciples were called Christians first in Antioch. Barnabas and Paul were chosen as the first missionaries, and they took with them on that first journey Barnabas' nephew, John Mark, as their helper. Unfortunately, a short way into their journey, as they came to Pamphylia, John Mark left them and he returned back to Jerusalem. And, I think Paul was very disappointed by this. And sometime later, when Paul wanted to do a follow-up on their converts from that journey, it was Barnabas who wanted to give Mark a second chance. It was Barnabas who, again, spoke up on behalf of Mark and kind of encouraged him back into the fold, if you like. It seems for an encourager like Barnabas, everyone is entitled to a second chance. Paul didn't think it was wise to take Mark again because he'd deserted them the first time and kind of abandoned the missionary work. And yet years later, we see Paul commending John Mark in his letter to in Colossians. While awaiting his execution, Paul asked Timothy to bring with him John Mark. When a person is facing death, the people he wants to surround himself with are the close relatives and dear friends. So Barnabas' encouragement really paid off. I guess Christians owe a lot to Barnabas. If If you think that Paul went on to write 14 epistles, and Mark, who went on to write the Gospel according to Mark, in a sense, almost half the New Testament, we kind of owe to Barnabas and his encouragement. Even though he didn't personally write a single book in the Bible. Such is the power of encouragement. And the Church of God needs many more encouragers, just like Barnabas. So that's what a person of encouragement looks like. But what is the purpose of encouragement? What does and what should encouragement look like in the church today? So the purpose of encouragement. Now, the word encourage, as ever, I like my dictionary definitions. The word means to comfort, console, and strengthen. Now, if you think of it literally, in a sense, to encourage, you're literally putting in courage. To encourage is to inspire another person with courage. People often connect the moving of God's Spirit only with signs, wonders, and miracles. However, when we truly encourage one another, we show how God's Holy Spirit is working in and through us. In Hebrews 3, verses 12 and 13, it says, "Be careful then, dear brothers and sisters. Make sure that your own hearts are not evil and unbelieving, turning you away from the living God. You must warn each other every day while it is still today, so that none of you will be deceived by sin and hardened against God." God commands us to encourage one another daily. We don't wait for others to encourage us, but we should take the initiative and become an encouragement, even if others aren't. And this is aimed at every believer, not just say preachers and pastors. Sure, one way to encourage and one way we get encouragement in the church is from the platform. But there are many other ways to encourage. And we need to beware as well, because the world is full of discouragers. And it is our Christian duty to encourage people. Many times, a word or an act of thanks, appreciation or kindness has helped a Christian who is struggling to stand on their feet and to keep walking with God. Blessed is the man that encourages. Which brings us back to the verses we started with, Hebrews 10, verses 24 and 25. Let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. And let us not neglect our meeting together, as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. We are to consider one another. To consider means to be attentive or mindful. In short, we are to habitually focus on encouraging one another. Not by chance, but by design. As part of our nature, we should be encouraging one another. We're to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. There's a good and a bad side in everyone. You think of the little angel and the little devil on your shoulder kind of thing, maybe. Galatians 5, verses 16 and 17, it says, "So I say, let the Holy Spirit guide your lives. Then you won't be doing what your sinful nature craves. The sinful nature wants to do evil, which is just the opposite of what the Spirit wants. And the Spirit gives us desires that are the opposite of what the sinful nature desires. These two forces are constantly fighting each other, so you are not free to carry out your good intentions." So here you can see we've got good things that we should be doing, but bad things that we have more of an inclination to be doing, that get in the way of us doing the good things. And we're here to encourage. We should be here to motivate someone's good side. And finally, in verse 25, we're told to not neglect our meeting together. And there's a connection between the two verses, 24 and 25. Let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works, and let us not neglect our meeting together. The two go hand in hand. Just turning up isn't enough. If we attend church but fail to encourage others, then we've not fully obeyed God's command. The purpose of our meeting together before Christ returns is not just to worship, but to encourage. The two things go hand in hand. It's one of the purposes for meeting together, to motivate each other to be the best people we can be, to be the best beacons of hope for the world as we go out into the world, to shine for Jesus out in the world, to encourage one another to be our best. So, why church? To encourage one another. Thanks for listening this morning. You take care, stay safe, and I'll see you real soon now. Thanks.